podcast role. Welcome in.
You're listening to An Imperfect Leader, the Superintendents and Leadership Podcast. Hello, Jamie.
Hello, Peter. How are you today?
Yeah, I'm doing pretty well. I received a number of texts today. So sometimes in a flurry of, can you believe this nonsense, I will hear from my superintendent friends. And so one group right now is dealing with pretty intense flooding. And so that's serious. And then another is dealing with the fact that some kid brought, no, I'm sorry, not the kid. The teacher thought it would be okay to bring like all these baby squirrels to class for the kids to play with, and a high school class. It wasn't, yeah. And so then, of course, this is creating quite a level of consternation for families who are sending emails to the superintendent about, this is disgusting. What are you doing? What's happening in your schools? And it did remind me of the time this kid brought like a stuffed bat, like that his grandfather had stuffed that weekend and brought it to like, hey, fresh. Hey. Yeah, I know. Just wild stuff. And so I've been giggling about this all day because I sent it to someone else who said, this really helps me understand why superintendents are so good at two truths and a lie. because oh my gosh, what they deal with. And I
bet you it's hard to come up with a lie.
Exactly.
You
like,
might as well just go three truths. Actually,
right.
I don't have a lie. That's all those things are true.
These are all wild. Exactly. I mean, some come to mind right now that are just so wild. And so it makes me think about, because we're constantly talking about like our role, and particularly around leadership and things like that. And how do we do that work? And our guests today are Peter Dewitt and Michael Nelson, and they are fantastic. And they talked about this idea of examining and modeling our own actions and being that imperfect leader, and thinking about not just how do we fix teachers, but how do we fix ourselves so that we can be the very best leader. And my thought around like these stories is, you can't make this shit up. And so like, how can we be the very best like leaders when we're also navigating in all these other like preposterous kinds of things? So anyway, that's what's on my mind this morning. And how are you?
Nice lead in. I don't have any wildness to share, save for I did just come back from a trip to see family in North Carolina, in Asheville. And so speaking of flooding, that was really a profound experience. I really enjoyed. They were very impacted. My family was very impacted by it, and as were many families. And I enjoyed talking to people. We went to multiple artist galleries who talked about how they were impacted by the floods. To see the recovery effort was pretty profound. And I just think that sometimes, I'm sorry to take it down this path, but there's a little bit of, maybe I can connect it to Peter and Michael, in that there's collective leadership here. That's what happened. That's what, almost by need, like everybody was wiped out. The River Arts District was wiped out. This is where artists are. The galleries, their art floated away. Their work floated away. And they are working to come back. They have come back through collective spirit, through collective leadership. It was a profound experience, and I loved it. You can never beat Asheville. I think Asheville as a place is a wonderful thing. But on top of that, to see this and see the way in which they had taken kind of what the two of them are talking about and thrived, it's starting to thrive, is really a special thing. And so
I love that. That's a great example, and so much better than mine. And so I really appreciate you really thinking about particularly this experience. What a profound experience for you, for your family, and to also just kind of see what it looks like to rebuild and to do that collectively. And our guests today will talk a lot about this sort of collective effort, collective efficacy, this idea that you cannot achieve anything if you just remain in isolation, you remain in this sort of idea of like loneliness, like you have to do this work together. So why don't we?
Yes, I believe that principals say yes to that, and then as I'm speaking from the principal perspective, I'm sure superintendents are the same, and maybe even harder because it's across systems. But principals within one system feel isolated and disconnected. And we forget, like, actually there's benefit by us trying to do some of the work together. Me even just learning to reach out to my colleagues was a huge step. Oh, you're right. I should just call Peter. Why didn't I call Peter? I didn't even think to call Peter. In fact, I was asking other people about this thing that had never done the job, and they're like, "Oh, that's crazy. You have crazy things to deal with." I'm like, at least Peter knows what other crazy things
exactly.
are.
He's got kids bringing squirrels to school. He's got flooding. He's got bats. He's got it's right. I mean, I think we should jump into the conversation.
Yeah. Let's do it.
Before we do that, though, you listen to Fresh Air ever? Do you ever listen to Fresh Air?
Oh, of course. Yes.
Of course. I was listening to Fresh Air and noticed that they're also advertising IXL. So just like our sponsor for our show. So it tells me either we're just as popular. Okay, we're not. But we both value the tools that can really truly help schools. And so our guests, Peter Dewitt and Michael Nelson, they challenge leaders to move from good intentions to lasting impact. And IXL provides a research-proven platform that's used in 96 of the top 100 schools. So help your students feel seen and heard by visiting IXL.com/imperfect today.
No one's surprised that you and I listen to Fresh Air. Whoever's listening to us realizes that we both listen to NPR probably quite a lot.
No doubt. You're listening to An Imperfect Leader, the Superintendent and Leadership Podcast. I'm Peter Stiefelman.
And I'm Jamie Manson.
We'll see you on the other side.
See you on the other side. Yeah.
No, we'll see you on the other side. We'll see you on the other side.
That sounds like a good idea. Let's do it.
Today on An Imperfect Leader, my guests are Peter Dewitt and Michael Nelson, two veteran educators and co-authors of Leading with Intention, and as well as their newest book, Lead Collectively. Together, Peter, the founder and CEO of the Instructional Leadership Collective, and Michael, longtime teacher, principal, superintendent, and former president of the Washington Association of School Administrators, WASA for short. They both bring decades of experience and a deep commitment to collective efficacy, to belonging, to instructional leadership. And I read their newsletter whenever it's available, as well as their co-authored Education Week pieces. So I can say with great confidence that they really do challenge leaders to move from belief to action, and then from action to that lasting impact. And we're going to get into that more. But first, let me greet you, Michael. Welcome back. And Peter, welcome to An Imperfect Leader.
Thank you. So great to be here with you, Peter.
Thank you. It's nice to meet you, Peter.
It's really nice to reconnect with you, Michael. And it's so nice to meet you and talk to you live, Peter. I do pestering both of you either by text or by email from time to time. And you're really wonderful about maintaining a dialogue on topics. And I wonder if we could start with something that you co-authored, something that really prompted me to reach out to you because I thought it was a really terrific piece. Bad Bunny. You co-wrote about how Bad Bunny's Super Bowl performance framed leadership as an invitation to widen who belongs. So can we start there? What did you mean by that?
It was just really interesting because watching the halftime show, we know that there was so much controversy around it and just not sure what he was going to do. And as I was watching it, it just struck me that he was taking you on a journey. I felt like I was on a journey just through neighborhoods and who he was pointing out and, and all of that kind of stuff. And then after the whole halftime show was done, I went back to read about some of the people that he invited to the show. And it was exactly what we wrote about, which is that it felt like it was just a moment of inclusivity and it was completely positive. And we tied it to leadership because whether you're a school principal, whether you're a teacher leader, whether you're a superintendent or whatever, it's how are you intentionally going through and just making people feel seen and heard? And I think that to me was one of the most important things from the performance. Obviously, besides the music and the dancing and everything else, it was how are you helping people feel seen and heard? Because much of the controversy around that too is the fact that we know that the people he was highlighting and wanted to show and be heard were often populations that were heavily discriminated against. And he wanted to show the other side, the culture, the family, the love, and all of that. And he ended with that whole idea about love is stronger than hate. And I was completely struck by the halftime show. And I think it's important to note that I'm not always that engaged with a halftime show. I'm old enough. You already introduced us by saying we have decades.
For those who are listening, these ancient men on the show.
Oh, no,
Go look at them on YouTube. Oh, my. Yeah.
Well, when I go to watch a halftime show, they're not often for me. I watch it and I'm more of a classical music kind of guy, but I really loved that halftime show. So that's why I wanted to be a part of writing it.
I felt so similarly watching it. Certainly there was so much leading into it that it almost seemed it was going to be so high stakes that it couldn't live up to one's expectations of either good or bad. And It was so positive. I totally agree. It was the barbershop, the bodega, the wedding, which actually, when you talk about being seen, this was a couple who had reached out to him to say, would you come to our wedding? And he's like, actually, will you come to my halftime show? And it was an actual wedding that took place. And he signed it as a witness, which was, or the handing his award to a child who's watching on TV to say that you can be anything you want to be, which is certainly something that we take very personally as educators, is that we say to children all the time, and we want to believe that it's possible, which is why we try to dismantle the sort of systems of oppression that exist to say, truly, if you want to be something, I want to be able to help you do that or to be a part of that journey with you. So I read it and I just was so impressed that you took it on, and then that you really reminded all of us that we have a role similar to Verito in terms of Bad Bunny to try to make things right in this world. And Michael, is there anything that you would like to add?
The blog came together very quickly, and that's always usually a sign that it's a solid piece of writing. But I think my favorite sentence is a five-word sentence. This was leadership as invitation. And I love the whole essence of when you think about leadership, this was leadership of invitation. And I have to tell you a story, Peter. That's who I am. And I just came from a funeral mass. So I just came from a funeral mass of a Native American woman. And before the mass started, the first 20 minutes was about honoring her Native culture and all of the aspects of what she was in and how she was born into a family, and how the blanket she received at birth, as they wrapped her in at birth, she put the culture is it's on the bed, and when you marry, and it's what you're wrapped in when you die. The idea of the culture of that blanket. And then she became a Catholic, and then the mass started. But the idea of the storytelling and leadership as this invitation, the people that were sitting there in the pews today were brought together around these two very contrasting ways of culture and understanding, yet we were sitting there as one in honoring this person. And I think as educational leaders, the cornerstone of our work is to work in public education and do all that we can for students and support the adults that are working with us and who we lead. And I think that idea of coming together and putting that invitation out that we can be one and united around that cause.
Michael, the podcast serves as an evergreen testimonial to whoever is a guest on it. And I wonder if you're comfortable. What was her name?
Her name was Margaret House. And if I'll just indulge the readers to honor her on this day.
I would hope so. And I'm so sorry for your loss, and I'm assuming Enumcla's loss.
Enumcla, yes. She's the mother of a board member who hired me. So no connection other than through this person. She honored me every single birthday. And any time that I hit the news, I had received a card in the mail, and she knew the importance of leadership and the weight of carrying when you're a leader. So it would be probably at least a card a month that I would receive from her out of the blue for no reason at all. I didn't mention that. I mentioned that in a personal note to the family. The priest said the same thing. So she picked leaders in our community to empower and to provide that invitation that I'm watching you and what you're doing is good work.
Oh, I'm so pleased to know her name and to know her legacy in terms of how the ripple effect for no doubt, the way that you interact with others as well. To return to Benito for just for Bad Bunny for a moment is to honor Margaret as well in this idea of how do you celebrate communities' diversity and elevate the many voices in a community. And no time is it more important than now in terms of our polarized communities. And I wonder, are there lessons or what advice do you have for leaders, maybe drawing from the article that your opinion piece, but what are some ways that they can do that? And I'll note also, I just finished reading, what was it called? Radical hospitality or something, or unconditional hospitality. So I've got this in my mind, this sort of idea of taking that next step. That writing that letter each month was an intentional step to connect with you and to remind you you're not alone. So I'm wondering just what are some ways that people can do that in this increasingly polarized time?
So it's funny you mentioned unreasonable
Unreasonable. Thank you.
A few years ago, Michael had reached out to me and said, if you have 13 minutes, just watch this video. I promise it's worth it. And I saved that email. And it was a TED Talk that Will Guidara, who wrote the book, actually was giving. And then Michael actually gave me the book as a gift for speaking at a conference when he was working with WASA. It connected with us both very much for a variety of reasons, maybe mine a little bit different from his. But one of the things that I think we always focus on, whether it's the blog, whether it's podcasts, whether it's our writing, whether it's how we're facilitating workshops and collectives, is the idea that we need to be able to find common ground. That's the blog for Ed Week, and there's a reason why it has that name. Adding to the polarization is not going to help anyone, at least in my opinion. And it's a struggle because, yes, I wake up angry sometimes too when I'm watching things. But then I have to kind of sit back and self-regulate and think, what would be the best path forward if I were a leader who is in a community, like many communities, that are polarized by politics and beliefs and all of that. And I think it's to find common ground. Where do we start? Where do we actually connect before we kind of divide? So that's something that I think is always in our minds. And we do a lot of things like, as far as where leaders are concerned, I think just when we're doing surveys and we're authentically reading what the results are and we're sharing why we're changing our practices based on what the feedback is giving us, letting people feel heard. Michael and I work with a lot of groups where it's just people feel very isolated and alone. So what are the ways that we can actually help them feel heard? And I think for me, it started when I was a brand new teacher. I grew up in a very white community in the Adirondacks in upstate New York, and I taught outside of New York City, and it was highly diverse and I loved it. And my family's diverse, but I loved it. And just teaching first grade and making sure that there were picture books that were a positive representation of all the kids that were in the classroom. Those are the kind of just really important and intentional details that you can take. And from a leadership perspective, it's the same thing. How are you reaching out to people to make them feel seen and heard?
If I just add on to what Peter said very quickly, is I have part of our work is to work in instructional leadership collectives, which is a term that we have coined for leaders working together. And we're working with the Washington Association of School Administrators on a project called Facilitating for Impact. And we have 5 different collectives, instructional leadership collectives, and around different themes. I'm leading one of the collectives called Enhancing Trust in Public Education, which encompasses 7 different superintendent and district office staff members from across the state of Washington coming together, building the cycle of inquiry. What's our problem? What's our priority? What's our theory of action? What evidence are we going to begin to collect? And what's amazing is as we begin to collect this evidence, we have determined that there are 3 big themes, one of which is trust is relational, two-way communication is essential, and that trust is differential. It needs to be differentiated. And it's fascinating as we have each brought our data to the table with each meeting that we have as a group of collective, how the data falls into those 3 pieces. And so that idea of breaking out of the isolation and coming together and recognizing that we all want to enhance trust in public education, that there's a united front around that. We may need to approach it differently in varied communities, but essential for our craft, our profession, that's a key.
I could imagine in those conversations, there's sort of what have been the traditional models of communication or the very formal ways that we communicate, and leveraging some of them more informal ways, or thinking differently about where we meet and where we convene and how we talk with community. And wow, I'd love to be a fly on that wall. Our guests today are Peter Dewitt and Michael Nelson, 2 veteran educators, co-authors of Leading with Intention, and their newest book, Lead Collectively. And I think, Michael, you have really done a nice job of introducing us to this work. And so I wonder if it's okay, let's shift to your new book and let's talk about that. It's Lead Collectively, from Belief to Action to Impact. And in the book, you challenge leaders to really move beyond just what might be considered good intentions. And I read that and it really struck me right at the core. Good intentions. Oh man. So many of us have fallen victim to those good intentions. So why don't you, if you don't mind, tell us about your book? And I imagine that has really anchored some of the work that you're doing with the Washington Association of School Administrators, and those who don't know you very well should know you're doing this work, I think, in Australia, all over the country. It's pretty marvelous, the reach that you both have.
We're thrilled and honored to say that we're working with many different states and districts across the United States. And we've just signed on to work for 15 months in Brisbane and Queensland, Australia. And we just came back from a trip there in the last week. And the connection that leaders need and want and have a strong desire to break out of the isolation and the loneliness of working, let's say, in a school building or in a district office job or as a superintendent, and break down those silos and work together is huge. And what we've discovered is there are key common themes that no matter where we are across Australia, Canada, and the United States, which is where we are primarily working, are the same. And if those 10 to 12 themes are the same, how can we begin to tackle those together? And that's been quite remarkable. Segue right to the book Lead Collectively, Peter, is right on the cover. The cover, the image of the three-legged stool really says a lot to us. A three-legged stool it's one that even if one were shorter, it might be tilted, but there's still some stability to it, where a four-legged stool, there's not. And so we have three key emphasis around those three-legged stool, the legs of the stool, one of which is the orange. We have color coded it as well. So when you look at the book, the orange section is all around that leg of the stool built on shared understanding. And each of the legs of the stool have two different chapters. One of the chapters is really full of, here's the research around shared understanding that you go to dive deeper. And then the next chapter is, here's practical tips in terms of protocols and processes and stories about building shared understanding. The teal leg of the stool is joint work. And then the blue leg of the stool is that data, that evidence piece. So data, evidence, and we break that into evidence of progress and evidence of impact. Peter?
I think this book, I have said, is the best book I've ever been a part of, because what happened is Michael and I were working, we had a 15-month contract in New Brunswick, Canada, and we had 50 principals that we were working with, and they were so heavily engaged in person events. But when it came to virtual sessions, the participation rate was going down. And we just kept talking to each other about what's going on, because everybody was so heavily engaged. There's so much excitement, but people were getting zoomed out. And we did surveys, exit tickets, for about three months. And we just started to look at them. And that's where we started to notice common themes. So when we met with them in person, we just said, there are 6 common themes that came out of your feedback. So we're going to put here are 6 tables. You choose which one you want to go to. And within 5 minutes, 10 minutes, everybody went to a table and they committed to that common theme for a year. And then we facilitated the collective. Through that process, one of the things that, if you're facilitating professional learning and you're not learning at the same time, then you're not doing it correctly. And for us, it is deeply impactful to us when we're facilitating professional learning, because most of our work is long-term. And by nature of using Mentimeter, which is an online engagement tool that we use when we're working with them, or it's exit surveys, it's the partnerships that we've had with the leadership team, because they really need to know that they're a partner with us, understanding their context, all of those kind of things have added to our own knowledge base. And that's where Lead Collectively came from. And because we're trying to deepen the work that we're doing in New Brunswick, and the 3 people from the leadership team that we're working with, Rosemary, Michael, and Sylvie, actually wrote the foreword to the book, because we were working together so closely, trying to find what is going to be most impactful, what would the content be. And we already knew that we had the definition behind collective leader efficacy. We already had that. We've been writing about that for a long time. So we shared understanding, joint work, and evidence of impact. But it gave us the opportunity to be much more intentional and evolve through that every time we were meeting, because it made us ask different questions. It made us look at evidence in a different way. I remember Michael and I were together. I stay at his house in Enum Plug with his wife, Britt, a lot. I have my own room there. And I was there with him. And we just had this major breakthrough with looking at a theory of action and tying it to evidence of impact and looking at leading and lagging indicators that are tied to the theory of action. And it just worked. And it keeps working with everybody we're working with. So lead collectively is really that. It's almost like I don't want to sound corny, but it's kind of a love letter to New Brunswick and everything that they helped us with as we were going through all this work. But it's also a roadmap of the work that we are now doing,
Right.
and a roadmap for school leaders to look at how am I developing shared understanding? What are the intentional actions I'm taking? And it's not an add-on. It's not about doing more. It's about looking at what you already have and refining it. What does joint work really look like? And we cite Judith Warren Little's work where that's concerned. What is evidence of impact really focus on? And we cite Bernhardt's work where that is concerned, but looking at not just the lagging summative stuff, but it's the leading stuff. How are we using this right now to actually guide our instructional leadership moves? And what does that look like?
So I really feel like you've done such a beautiful job of giving a high level, and I love this idea of it's really a love letter to New Brunswick. Might there be an example from either the book or from your own experiences that you could walk us through just briefly? Just what was it about when you say collective efficacy about, or the coming to a shared image of what joint work looks like?
Yeah.
So was there sort of a concrete example of where they took that good intention or that sort of aspiration and then actually put it into action with what it sounds like nice and organized cycles of inquiry of if it's not going as we had hoped, what might be those mid-course corrections that we might take?
So for Next Level Leaders, which is a state-run program that we're doing with the Washington Association of School Administrators and AWSP, I have a data collective. So it's about 10 school principals and a regional person. And they are focusing on using data it started out by, we're going to use data to drive teaching practices. That's what the common theme was. But within the first month when we were developing the problem of practice, Michael and I kind of forced leaders to go back and say, so let's not always look at what we need to get teachers to do. What do you need to get to do as a leader? What actions are you taking? And that's been kind of an aha for all of the groups we're working with, because I think they're used to going to professional development where if I could just get teachers to do this, everything would be great. So the shift that you're looking at is everybody within that collective started to say, oh, this isn't just about what I need to get the principals to do or the teachers to do. It's about what I need to do as a principal. As we were going through and writing a theory of action, there was one principal in particular that said, if I could get teachers are not using data consistently to drive their instruction during PLCs. And then his if statement was, if our leadership team uses models using data to drive our leadership practice more consistently, then we're going to be able to have an impact on teachers. So I just simply wrote back to him and asked, so you mentioned in the if statement that your leadership team needs to practice this more consistently. If you're not, might you actually add your team to the problem of practice as well? And he came back and said, that's critical feedback that I wasn't doing. What that changes into is less of that notion of, I need to get teachers to do it. It's, oh my gosh, am I doing it as a team?
How do I model?
Now, now his specific practices are about how he models using formative assessment from teachers, how he's modeling the use of, let's take a look at that. Let's look for common themes about what's happening in the classroom and what might not be happening in the classroom. He's having those discussions at his faculty meeting with teachers who are in different groups, being able to have the discussion. And then it actually strengthens his walkthroughs, because when he's doing walkthroughs, those are the things that he's able to engage in with students and teachers. So it's just about keeping them going back to what is your leadership move? And that would be one of the examples.
I love that. It's a great example. Now, I think about how often, if as leaders sit in with a PLC and they observe more, there's just a lot of admiring the problem or listing scores without really speaking to, so what does this mean for us as teachers, as leaders, as a school system, as a school district? So what a great example. Thank you.
I think I'd like to go a path, if there's time, just about the connectedness of the process, Peter, because one of the things that for me, when I went through a inquiry cycle, or collective inquiry cycle is what we call it, I would lead the group that I was leading through what's our problem in practice, what's our priority, and then I'd step and say, okay, what's our theory of action? And then it's okay, then what evidence are we collecting? And those of you who are not seeing what my hands are doing, but it's almost these, I'm doing these in silos. And what we do in leading the process is make a direct connection between each part of those. And there's almost like two levels. So imagine the shared understanding we believe is that problem of practice and the priority. So we believe that the green, the joint work is building that theory of action. And then the data is building your evidence of progress and evidence of impact, that leading and lagging data. So now imagine those three components and you going across. Your problem of practice directly connects to the if part of your theory of action. So if your problem, like a group that I'm currently working with, their problem in practice is, gosh, our literacy scores in elementary are not at the level that they need to be at. Connect that problem of practice, then what are the things that you need to do? And where we say it needs to be a complex if part of your theory of action, at least three components. If we do this and this to attack literacy, then based on those if statements, you get over to that third leg of the stool. What are those evidence of progress? What's the leading data? The data that when we receive, we can make micro leadership moves along the way. So that's one track of those three pillars. Now go to the second track of those three pillars, my priority. My priority is that 100% of third graders are reading at grade level, or whatever my priority is in terms of, let's say, that literacy problem of practice. So that priority directly ties to the then and the so that part of your theory of action. So a theory of action in our definition is, if we do this, then this will happen so that this happens. So the then and the so that tie directly to the language in your priority, which then the then and the so that tie directly to your lagging data, your evidence of impact, that cumulative summative data that's going to tell you, did you hit the mark at the very end of the cycle, whether it's a school year or a 3-year goal. Those connections and that aha between the three legs into those two levels has been mind-changing for principals. And what they have told us is their staff now is beginning to understand what their school improvement plan's all about. They're directly seeing it. And the leading data in particular, that's what the principals are bringing back for their staff meetings. Everybody bring this to your staff meeting because this is what we're going to chew on. It ties directly to our building improvement plan and our theory of action and evidence that we're gathering.
I imagine that as you are declaring, or a leader declares probably the wrong word because we try to shy away from leaders making declarations. As one is observing an area for which they want to do some meaningful work, and so your theory of action or your problem of practice, I imagine there's a pause to say, and why that's important. Because it's like, we want to have an impact on third grade reading where 100% of our kids are reading on grade level. And taking a pause to say, why is that important? Because we know that if third graders are not reading on grade level, it is more likely than not that they may drop out of school, or they may not have the credits to graduate on time, or that they will perpetually struggle and not be able to take the extracurricular courses that may really inspire them. They'll just be taking remedial coursework and stuff like that. And I imagine just a moment to say why that's important sort of helps them guide to, and that's why we have to do this work. And that's why we have to collect this data, because it tells us whether or not we're meaningfully making progress.
And that's why we've added the so that to
yes, that's your why.
Yeah. So that is your why framed in the positive. So it's not about they're not able to do the classes so that
they can
open and have the access to.
I should write a book about this. We're going to be right back. If you don't mind, we're going to just take a minute and hear from our sponsors. We'll be right back. Hey, district leaders, I know you already know this. In schools worldwide, cell phones are posing real challenges on student engagement and mental well-being. And I want you to meet Yonder, a proud sponsor of An Imperfect Leader. And let me share this story from a visit I made to some schools in Silicon Valley. I asked some kids what they liked about Yonder, and after some funny looks, They shared that actually, with Yonder, teachers don't have to battle with them over phones anymore. In fact, one kid said to me he didn't have to worry anymore about his parents texting him in class. And the kid next to him, like, sort of shoved him and goes, "Texting? My mom used to FaceTime me in class." I want to introduce you to a support system that increases teaching and learning. I want you to discover why 1 million students choose Yonder daily. Minimize distractions, maximize learning potential. To learn more, go to overyonder.com. YONDR. So I want to talk a minute about the Mosaic Project. It is one of our favorite organizations and has over 25 years of experience empowering students to really celebrate differences, communicate assertively, and resolve conflict peacefully at their outdoor school. I happen to have experience being part of the Mosaic Project, and so I can absolutely tell you it's an amazing organization. Their innovative SEL curriculum is now available to our Imperfect Leader audience. And so you can get a 10% discount through their new documentary film-based Mosaic Classroom Project. So just let the people know during your onboarding process to receive that 10% discount is to just mention An Imperfect Leader. Learn more about the Mosaic Project at mosaicproject.org.
When leaders think in systems, they think differently. They see the big picture, making decisions that create coherence and strengthen communication across their teams. They build adaptability, flexibility, and engagement. Every day, school leaders face complex challenges, from student engagement to staff alignment. What if your team could see those challenges as part of a bigger picture? That's what happens when you think in systems. It's how leaders turn complexity into connection and challenges into opportunities for growth. At the Waters Center for Systems Thinking, we help educators and organizations build this capacity, developing the habits and tools that turn vision into action. Think differently, think in systems. Sign up for our webinars, free resources, or a consultation by visiting our website, which you can find in the show notes.
Hey, we're back for segment 2. I'd like to start with, so I have a leadership model that I use when I get to the opportunity to work with others. And there are these overarching themes around appreciative inquiry, around shared leadership, around supporting resilience. And I find that your leadership approach has these themes as well. In fact, in your Unreasonably Good Leadership newsletter, you push back on this negativity in education by centering gratitude and kindness and shared voice. And just as an aside, I sort of coined this phrase "and," which is active negative data, this sort of perseverating over what's not going well, as opposed to where we should be really focusing our work in terms of what is going well and then how do we get more of it. So this idea of appreciative inquiry. And you've really shifted the conversation to look at the good, like what's going well. And so I'm curious about the kind of responses that you're hearing from those who you lead and the general public, because you're really good at having this public presence out there. And then since you do this work around the world, I guess the second sort of follow-up would be, and I know you indicated that there are similar themes worldwide. And I also imagine there's some differences in how people are approaching this work. So do you mind just talking a little bit about that? So it's a kind of an extension of what you said in part 1 of our conversation, Michael, around, so then what? So what are we going to do because it's important?
Yeah, that was a big question.
Yeah. You didn't work in my school district. That was kind of short for me. They go, wait, what was the question again? And I go, oh, sorry.
I got it all.
I rambled.
I'm good.
I like you, Peter.
Listen, Michael and I both have, I think we got into teaching from very different contexts, but our values were very much the same. And because we've talked about that quite a bit, I'm the youngest of 5, first to go to college. And I barely graduated from high school. I was retained in elementary school. When I became a teacher, my mom used to talk about me like I was one step closer to God because I was a teacher. Like she was just so proud all the time. And then I became a principal and there was the same pride. And I remember when I was teaching, there was a friend that I was teaching with. His mom was so disappointed he was a teacher. And I was like, I don't get that. What? I really just did not understand that whatsoever because 1, I think my mom was just so happy I had a career, but number 2, the whole value of education. And then I realized through reading Jonathan Kozol and a bunch of others that the negative rhetoric was really killing us in education. And I became outspoken about that when I started the Finding Common Ground blog in 2011. But I always wanted to look at the positive because I'm, I don't think it helps us to focus on what people aren't doing. And even when people are leaving our professional learning, we will say, we don't want you to go back to school and say, these are the things missing from the classroom. Go back to school and look at how you're doing this work already. Like, we really want to make sure we're doing that. And the unreasonably good newsletter is evolving. It's becoming shorter, and we're starting to put out from our own website a collective brief. So it's going to be more brief, and it is more intentional, but it's still the positive thing. It's not focusing on what people aren't doing. It's not focusing on all the arguments. It's focusing on how can we help everybody get better, including ourselves. And yeah, there is a lot to be grateful for. I am incredibly grateful that I am 55 years old. I get to do this work. I get to work with educators. I was grateful when I was a teacher for 11 years. I was grateful for when I was a school principal for 8 years. And I think that I want to say I'm grateful because, quite honestly, education changed my life.
Yeah.
And even though I may have had a tougher childhood because my dad passed when I was really young and my mom never remarried, I met a lot of kids who had it much tougher than I did. And they didn't always have the support. I had some really great support from my mom and my family and everything else. So becoming a teacher was a life-changing experience for me. And that mentality will never change. And I think it's important that there's so much negativity out there that can be easily streamed on TikTok that I do think it's our job to give the positive side. I'm not going to say that I'm always positive. Sometimes Michael has to talk me down from a ledge because I'm like, but that's what a good partnership does too, right? Like, it gets us to look back at what should we be grateful for? What is the work? What is going to most help people? And screaming about something isn't it. Helping them try to kind of go through and figure out what is the next best step to actually kind of feed their soul.
Right.
That's what we want to be able to do.
It's not unreasonable to think that our beliefs, values, and principles are often guided by the experiences we've had. And the experience you just described, I am sure also observing a mother who worked incredibly hard to make everything work for you and your siblings, and then the rest of the community as well being a support, and that the school possibly played a positive role, or if not, how you took that experience and then brought a different lens about wanting it to be positive for all children. And I think that you brought likely to your classroom this idea or this ability to empathize with children who are struggling, and then certainly could bring it to a larger group as principal, and then certainly now influencing others. I was thinking about something you also said earlier, and I think it was Michael, in terms of leading this group, enhancing trust in public education. That's your collective,
Correct.
right? And I imagine that that's a really pivotal or profound part of the work, is to say more than 90% of America's children go to public schools, and I'll say publicly funded charter schools. And so, like, how do we enhance the trust in our public education system by reminding people of the very good things that are happening there? Because it is so easy for us to remain silent when there's a sort of this negative push towards trying to change that narrative and dismantle what should be a promise that we make to all children, that you get a high quality public education in our nation.
You know what? I think it's just that whole work in progress mentality. I had some really great coaches. I had some really great teachers when I was young. I had things that I was going through that just kind of were a barrier to me when it came to learning. And when I say I barely graduated, it was true. I graduated fourth from last in my class after 3 community colleges and meeting some people that actually helped me change my life. Yeah, it gave me an empathy lens when I walked into the classroom, because I wanted kids to understand that just because you struggle in one area doesn't mean you're doomed to struggle for the rest of your life.
Yeah. Empathetic and hopeful, as opposed to empathetic and bitter. I did it, so can you. No, it's, I'm here for you.
Yeah, and I give my mom a lot of credit. She passed away a few years ago, and she went back to get her GED after my dad died. So I was in 6th grade and she's doing her GED. And I remember sometimes how she was treated as a cafeteria lady. And I was like, that's just not how you treat people. So all of those kind of things, and I think that's naturally who Michael is.
Yes.
And-
And Michael was on our podcast, I think in season 1 or 2. And I'll never forget where you placed your office, Michael,
Yeah.
in terms of being very intentional about where you were going to be so that you could be a part of everybody's life and they would have a connection to you. You didn't hide somewhere. And then particularly, I can't remember her name at the moment, but what she would say, Michael, because it was about like the
Sharon.
intention, Sharon. And so just that's always stuck with me. It's just how intentional you were about the relationship with people and how that translated into real achievement for kids.
I had a jarring responsibility or a jarring experience, Peter, and that was my older brother was teaching in the middle school when I became superintendent, and I was assistant superintendent at it for 7 years before I became superintendent for 14. And when I'm in schools all the time, but I walked into his classroom and walked around his middle school where he was at, and he called me that night and said, Mike, you need to realize you're the superintendent. And I said, Tim, what does that mean? And he said, people get immediately nervous. And I said, I'm still the same person that I was a month ago, but I just have a different title. And he goes, you're the superintendent. So, Peter, when you become a leader, you also have a responsibility. And that responsibility is you get to determine who you want to be and how you want to act in order to impact the culture in which you're leading. And for me, that was through the words that you started this conversation, through being grateful, through showing kindness, through seeking the positive. And it doesn't mean that as a leader, I shied away from tough conversations that I had to have. But in actuality, those tough conversations were maybe 1 to 3% of the job, which allowed me 97%. Let's just use 3%, 97%. I could be Mike and I could truly honor and acknowledge positively the work that was occurring throughout my system and making sure that I know people's names and their stories and their families. That's not incidental. That
Right.
leads to good performance for the culture and for ultimately for student achievement.
I love it. I'd like to close with a question. Peter, Michael's already answered this question, so you're off the hook.
So
It's a
you know,
question.
every time you say that, my name and then my middle name is Michael. So every time you say Peter Michael, I feel like my mom's going to come.
That's right. Did you clean your room, Peter Michael?
Yeah, I know,
did.
exactly. Like my office is straight up right.
I'd like to ask you a question that I ask everyone who comes on our program, and that is, how does the term an imperfect leader resonate with you?
I always found it very interesting because when I first started listening to your podcast and heard about the imperfect leader, I think it resonates positively with me because we as leaders put a lot of pressure on ourselves to be perfect all the time, and it's exhausting. And when we are doing, whether it's work in collectives, which I don't know if we thoroughly explain, but it's small groups of 8 to 10 leaders that are interested in a common theme, and it's cross role, cross districts, cross regions, and sometimes cross state. Whether we're doing that work or we're working individually in a coaching model, it is amazing how often leaders will self-judge in the conversation about they're not doing enough or they're not working hard enough. And these are the same people that are working 10, 11 hours a day and answering emails on Saturday mornings. I think talking about the imperfect leader is kind of liberating in a way, to be able to say that it's not about being perfect. It's about what are we learning in our role to ever evolve professionally and personally, to get better at who we are as a person or as a leader. So I think imperfect leader resonates with me very well because it opens up a discussion about what that looks like and gives us the opportunity to talk about the self-judgment we often have that we need to find a way to get rid of.
I love it. If people want to learn more about the work that the two of you lead, want to become part of a collective, how can they find you?
Easy enough to go to Instructional Leadership Collective. Just Google us and our website, our very updated website. We've been doing a lot of work on it over the past week. You can go to the website and you'll find out more information. You can join our collective and ask us about specifically what instructional leadership collectives could look like.
Perfect. And we'll also put a link in our notes. Our guests today were Peter Dewitt and Michael Nelson, two veteran educators, the leaders of the Instructional Leadership Collective and co-authors of Leading with Intention and their newest book, Lead Collectively. Gentlemen, thank you so much for giving me your time. I'm grateful for vulnerable, candid, caring. Just every bit of our conversation just was so meaningful. I really felt like we were actually talking and not just interviewing. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, we're back. Peter, I loved the conversation about Bad Bunny and the halftime show. I wouldn't have changed it. I wouldn't have even talked about the book. I'd be like, can we get back to Bad Bunny? When we circle back, there are a few things came to mind. One, Peter Dewitt talked about it. He said he's a classical guy. I am grateful that he was so moved by it. I felt the same way. I mean, I think I've joked with you. I've told this joke multiple times. I definitely want to be reincarnated as Puerto Rican. That's for sure. My thought is like, only Puerto Ricans get a parade in New York for existing. Like Mexicans, we don't get parades like that. People die. That's when you get some celebration.
There's I don't know. I was going to say a Cinco de Mayo sort of bastardization, but it's
That's not ours.
I mean, the Battle of Puebla.
That's not ours. And we lost anyway.
And they lost. Exactly. Like, what happened the next day? We're all talking about the next day.
But what I loved about it was that the link that I want to make is about leadership and who, when we talk about leadership being representative, they use the term diverse. And I'm all for that in terms of understanding diversity as multiple different things, race being one of them. Race is one of them, gender is one of them, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That who belongs as a part of the definition of leader in the actual action of leadership that we take in our system, that's what matters here. That the impact is massive. That when you say, actually, yeah, Bad Bunny's going to perform, and yes, it will be in all Spanish. He even made a joke. Benito made a joke when they announced it, and he said, it's this many months away. That gives you just enough time to learn what I'm singing.
I haven't actually researched this, but I've been told that Duolingo did increase quite a bit.
Oh, good. I was so glad.
The downloads to learn Spanish. But I think you bring up something really interesting because in the moment of my conversation with them, and I still feel this way following the conversation, this idea that leaders must celebrate diversity and dismantle systems of oppression. And why? Because they said to ensure that every child and adult feels like that they are seen, that they feel that they belong. And all of that is true. And now hearing what you've just said brings me to this another level of like realization, or I don't know. Oh yeah, duh. It also should be why it is so important that not only do we see leaders who look like us, see leaders who don't look like us, and to know that it isn't just about creating that space to be seen, but rather that they have real leadership roles. And that often when someone will say to me like, oh, I've just been hired in this position and I'm feeling pretty excited. And I really feel like the district is making a statement about diversifying its leaders and having more voices. And my response always is, do you have a budget? Because if you don't have a budget, it's just a title. Unless you have a budget that allows you to make decisions and pay for them, then it's just window dressing.
Yeah. I mean, that's the intentionality part.
Yes, good point.
What I think happens is that the people don't understand enough of the benefit. Like they don't understand what they're missing out on. And so when you include a different perspective, a different experience intentionally put them into a leadership position, your system benefits by having someone who thinks radically different than the status quo. And this, even if you continue down the traditional path of the school systems do, what do you talk about? You talk about wanting to always pulling back to the status quo. You'll get some benefit to it responding slightly differently and then thus a whole new group of kids, a whole new group of families. That basically what I'm saying is I think we undervalue what the difference of thought brings.
Yes. That's why I think when you said diversity absolutely includes race and class and gender and sexual orientation and religion and ability and language. I mean, all of those identities in a space will slow down the decision-making because it requires a great deal of leaning in, listening, agreeing, disagreeing, arguing, repairing what has been broken because of the fact that, you know what, you're going to say something that you don't intend to be dismissive or offensive, and it will be. And so that's okay as long as you are working through it together. And you've created these nested patterns that
support curiosity, that support empathy, that support compassion.
I love that. I mean, that leads to the three-legged stool.
Yes. Yeah.
One of the
yeah.
legs, they talk about this idea of, I think one of the legs was trust is relational, two-way communication is essential, and that trust is differential. And that idea is what I want to frame here is everybody defines trust differently. And taking the time to understand what builds trust with you across my leadership group, you'll get so much more as a result of it. Such stronger leadership because you'll know how to build trust. If you don't, I will use myself. I will probably try to build trust based on what I think is what I think builds trust and what I like. And that won't work. It works for Jamie, but it won't work for the whole team. And now my team's angry because I didn't do X, Y, or Z related, or we don't have enough trust for you to ask that question or make that move. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I did all this other thing. I did all these things. Like, nobody cared about those things. You cared about those things. It's to your point about I framed my big ideas.
Yeah. Here they are. Here are 8 goals. Yeah.
The last thing that I really liked is that, so if we're talking about including leaders across a diverse spectrum of people, we're being intentional about picking those people, then we're examining like, okay, so we need to be collective in our leadership process, which we talked about earlier about the isolation that comes with being in the system. The next is, how do you know it works? And that question, I'm interested to know, this is me not being a superintendent. How do you know that it works? When you do something innovative, you actually are trying to disrupt the status quo. What are your markers? What were your markers, Peter? How did you know what?
You have to do that? You have to establish this for whatever it is, whatever initiative, program, or vision you've cast together, is to also say, as part of this process, how do we know we've arrived? How do we know we're making progress? And so, I mean, part of that is an inquiry-based model of saying, how's it going and what are we learning? And then making the adjustments as appropriate. But you certainly want to work backwards to say, for example, we created I wanted to call it High School 2.0, but I was outvoted and we called it Early College, which made so much more sense. So I'm glad we did. This idea that, and we've talked about it before, and people are seeing it all over the country, juniors and seniors attending a local community college, either full-time or half-time, having all rights and privileges as a high school student. And that in its own says, oh, that's really great. What were we trying to achieve? A couple of things because of what we were hearing from our focus groups. One, college is exceedingly expensive, and I don't know how I'm going to be able to pay for it without creating so much debt for my kid that they'll still be paying it off in their 60s. So you're telling me my kid can get 2 years of college debt-free because you're going to take the tuition payments that the state provides and you're just going to pay it for their college tuition? Okay, I'm listening. The next thing was, will my kid be able to graduate high school, maybe with some of those industry recognized credentials, or at least along the way, getting those micro credentials or whatever that puts them in a really good position to get a job or to be just a few months away from working in a real profession or joining the unions for whether it be pipe fitters or electricians or whatever, but to be ready to do those kinds of jobs. So you're telling me my kid can actually make a meaningful income and be ready to go. So that fills your role of saying you're going to prepare kids for an unpredictable world or an ever-changing world, or they're going to be college, career, and life ready, whatever it is that you've sort of cast as a vision. This seems to be a really good way to do that. So you're not just doing it because you want to feel good about creating a partnership and doing something that you think is innovative, but rather can be transformative, particularly for communities that are seeing kids move away.
Yeah.
Because these communities are like, they're just dying because the kids don't see any opportunities locally, so they leave. And so early college, with whether you're partnered with your local community college or an extension that the state universities have going, can provide a really good opportunity for that community to continue to thrive.
That's so interesting. Makes me wonder I wonder what research has been done about the idea of a positive school experience, positive public school experience in a community that is struggling as a result of business having fled or whatever, like the factory closed, we don't have that, or the military base closed. But if the public school experience is so positive, then does it ever cause kids to say, want to make my community great. And
I have to imagine there are. And those who are listening, if you are familiar with a community that, as Jamie just described, the big employer left. And so now the only big employer is the school district.
right.
And yet they doubled down or partnered with with a district that's their neighbor. And one district decided to go all in on welding. And another one went all in on information technology or whatever. But they did those programs really well and sort of reinvigorated, rediscovered, renewed a sense of community that then created a new industry. I bet you that exists. I mean, how could it not?
That's my guess. Yeah. How could it not is right. Exactly. Because you make kids feel great about what they can do. They take pride in where they are. If you make kids, as school often does, make kids feel terrible about who they are and what they can and what they can't do,
Wow.
then they're like, yeah, I don't want to come back. Why would I come back here? There's no work and school sucked.
Yeah. I was recently having a conversation with someone about the biggest sense for humans is the sense of belonging, right? This idea that you're a part of something. And so the last thing I think people really want to do is to see their hometowns die. They leave because they have to. And so I'd be curious to see the examples of those who really invested in their communities and the communities really began to thrive. And I imagine, just to go back to Peter Dewitt and Michael Nelson, like whether it's schools or even city government, those systems working together and applying this three-legged stool of shared understanding, joint work, evidence of impact, that they can do that work together. That doesn't have to be a leadership book that's for schools necessarily, but rather lots of institutions.
I agree. I mean, yeah, we've talked about that too. That my wife works in children's hospitals here in Oakland and in San Francisco. And when I hear about how this hospital system works, I'm like, it just sounds so similar to the school system.
It really is. Yeah. Different acronyms, but a lot of the same issues. Yeah, absolutely.
It's amazing.
It's wild how similar they are.
Anyway, that was really fun. I really enjoyed listening to them. I hope others buy the book, and I hope others enjoy the conversation.
Me too. You've been listening to An Imperfect Leader, the Superintendents and Leadership Podcast. I'll see you next week, Jamie.
Yeah, see you next week.